Worried about sky-high energy prices? Concerned that over-reliance on undersea cables and pipelines is a major risk to our energy supplies in these very troubled and uncertain times? Well, Energy and Sustainability Centre Isle of Man directors Ralph Peake and Dave Quirk might well have the answers you're looking for. Ralph, of course, is a former MHK, and Dave is the Energy Transition Advisor at DT Offshore, the Technical University of Denmark. They've had a busy week. This week you've been visiting various people and announcing to those who are prepared to listen the results of a year's worth of research and investigation and consultation. What are the key findings that you've come up with?
Well, what we really want to do is take the impact report which Professor James Curran developed in 2019 and then Council of Ministers then adopted, and it then formed the basis of the Climate Change Act. And what we want to do really is to really educate people that we can use our abundant natural resources here on the Isle of Man. We're blessed with all this natural resources, wind and solar as well. It is a bright place here on the Isle of Man. We want to turn that into renewable energy so we can then have a stable cost of energy going forth the future for our residents as well as our international and local businesses. And
we hear a lot of voices who have concerns about the whole renewable agenda. They seem to think that this in some way is created to effectively to introduce more taxation and stealth taxes, and then there are loads of scare stories about the technology, the obvious one being when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, how do we actually power our society?
Yes, well, you're right about the taxation. Anything that is successful or anything that does generate income is one that governments around the world will use to raise taxation. And I think that's a fair point. We all want our social neighbourhoods and our societies to be paid for by taxation, a lot of those, and that's the right thing to do, and the island is certainly no different with that.
And of course we already have fuel duty, which brings in a lot of income for the island anyway.
Absolutely. But the great thing now is that you're concerned about when the wind stops blowing, there is more than enough not only evidence but actually working projects around the world on small islands as well that will actually deliver all the energy that's needed by that small island or that nation, so that the technology is now available off the shelf. And that's what we're really trying to help people understand now, that there's now, it's not a fear for the future. We can have all these solutions right here, right now.
I would turn it round. Actually, it's revenue for the Isle of Man. In the old days, if you had an oil and gas field, it was worth something to the country. What we have here is wind and a moderate amount of solar. We've got mountains and water as well. That's all worth money, and so it's essentially a green sector which can finance other things on the island. It's almost risk free. It's just how best do you optimize the value.
And I mean, you say almost risk-free. Nothing is risk-free, surely. And surely everything requires some investment or support from government.
Yeah, I think when I say risk-free, I mean the value is uncertain. There's always uncertainties in the future, but it has high value. But you do need the government to facilitate. And when I say high value, that of course means we're assuming that the private sector would be involved in some way or other.
Okay, and one of the resources that you've not mentioned, of course, actually there's two. The gas. We know that Crogga is keen to investigate and drill the gas that may or may not be lying underneath the sea to the east of the island, and we also know that some distance beneath our island is molten rock, and potentially the heat from that could power the future of the island. Surely we should be looking at these more conventional technologies first.
Well, as you know, I'm a geologist, so and actually I've worked on the East Irish Sea for many years and mapped the subsurface, which is looking where there could be new gas fields as well as existing gas fields. And clearly the 111225-1 well, which is now in Isle of Man territorial seas, this was drilled by BP in 1982, proved that exploration well proved there wasn't a gas field. They couldn't flow gas to the surface. That wasn't the target they were drilling the well for anyway at the depth that they thought there might be some gas. And the seismic data it's very fuzzy, poor. It's difficult to interpret, but what it doesn't show is a gas field. So the two sets of data really show that there isn't anything there. You could drill another well, and there is always a possibility you would find gas, but you would need good, high-quality data now, which is 3D seismic.
And I'm sure if someone from Crogga was here, they would say that, of course, the technology has advanced substantially since the original well was dug, and there were various issues, obvious problems with that initial trial test.
I don't think there were any issues. They did their best to try and get gas to surface, and they couldn't get any, which could be two reasons. There's no gas there at all, or the reservoir, where the rock they were hoping to get the gas out of, wouldn't allow gas to flow through it. It's what's called tight. It basically it is a impermeable rock. It doesn't allow gas out. So those two, it's probably a combination of both very, very little gas and a rock that doesn't allow gas to come out.
And of course, people listening to this programme who are big supporters of Crogga would probably then say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you, because you're trying to sell a different concept.
Well, the data clearly shows there isn't a well. That's why BP there isn't gas. That's why BP left. They put an exploration well costs an awful lot of money, and so you're not going to move away from something unless you're absolutely sure you haven't found what you wanted to find.
So why would Crogga proceed in this way then?
What happens with interpreting seismic data or looking at geology is sometimes you can get carried away with the beauty of your model. And once you start building a model and saying, oh, well, maybe there's a gas field here, and you start building and you start to make this picture and you start to convince yourself, and then you can sometimes convince others. But what they haven't done is convince any oil company to invest in this or a gas company. So I think, there's always these very, very small chances there's something there, but it's certainly very unlikely, and it's not worth the 12 billion that's been talked about. That's really fantastical. That's not the case.
But from a government perspective, Ralph, I mean, you'll know this from your days in Treasury, the prospect, even if it is an uncertain prospect of £12 billion coming into the Isle of Man, is one that's very difficult for government and Treasury to resist.
It is, isn't it? And I've seen in the press lately some members of Tynwald just saying that we should take this opportunity, and it's a great shame really, because the risk is so high, and it's going to take so long to find there's nothing there, when you actually then got a low risk solution blowing straight in our face. That's the difficulty I've got with trying to hang on to this very high risk option when we've got this natural resource here.
And what is that risk then? Because surely it's down to Crogga's shareholders. All government has to do is allow the drilling to happen.
Well, the risk is it's delays, because people are then pinning their hopes on this and then perhaps not investing and putting their time into things that will pay back much quicker, and the costs involved. And there will be, then, if there's costs involved, people are going to lose money.
There is also some technical risk, because whenever you drill deep, you're going into very high pressures, and you can't, that's just that you've got a lot of weight of rock on your head. So you need an awful lot of security, technical security, as you drill down there. it's very difficult if you're dealing with poor data to make the exploration well actually very safe. So you need to take an awful lot of precautions. That's what the regulations are for. But that costs more when you're drilling if you don't have a clear picture of what's going on. You know, it's a stab in the dark, and that stab is into very high pressures. And, you know, even if you did find a gas field, then probably you would have to fracture it, fracking as it's known. And of course, we all know there is risk there of earthquakes in the long run. So it's not a resource you would choose. And even if there was no renewable resources here, you know, you would look for something better in the offshore than 111225 It's not a discovery.
And all those points there that you just mentioned, Dave, that's really why regulations and best practices to have a 3D seismic survey before you'd actually carry out that dangerous drilling.
You need to know what's there, and the only way you can do that to start with is with 3D seismic nowadays, and otherwise the existing data is saying it's not worth drilling.
And of course that's something that Crogga is trying to jump that step at the moment, aren't they? The seismic survey was going to be done, and now they've decided actually no, they're so sure that they're going to go with the well, or that's what they hope to do.
Yeah, I think what I would say nowadays, if you've got an internal problem, you wouldn't use an X-ray, and that's the equivalent for 2D seismic. It's hard to pinpoint anything with an X-ray. You know, you'd use an MRI scan or something equivalent, so you can get a 3D image and you can find what the problem is, and that's the same really with seismic data. You're looking at, well below the seabed, and you really don't know what's there.
Okay. So then the other free energy solution that's often touted, certainly on the Manon line, is geothermal. Surely to goodness that's a goer.
Geothermal is a fantastic resource when you're in the right place, of course, in Iceland and parts of Italy. Some of the islands off the Portuguese and the Spanish islands, like the Canary Islands and the Azores, that all works well there. And the reason is because as you drill into the subsurface, it gets hot rather quickly. In the Isle of Man, unfortunately, it doesn't get hot quickly. It's quite cold rock, and we know that from the mining history. Even the granite in Foxdale is surprisingly cold, and you know there is a project. It was a project funded by European money, and that's into granite, and that's in Cornwall. It's but those granites are very hot. Unusually hot, in fact. They're slightly radioactive, which gives them their heat, and even then it's far from being economic. And they've got very unusual geology there. They actually drill into a fault, and they're trying to get water to flow from one borehole to another, which is quite difficult and costly because you've got twice the boreholes. Again, you don't know what you're going to drill into. You're guessing. You can't even use seismic data in this case, certainly not to pinpoint anything. So it's very difficult. So most wells actually in this sort of environment fail. They don't actually get a resource. If you did, you're probably only talking 1 to 2 megawatts of energy, and you're drilling very, very deep and hugely expensive. You drill wells in Europe for geothermal, but that's into an aquifer. That's where there's warm water that you can then put into a district heating scheme, so you pipe the hot water around and fill radiators in your house. That, again, the Isle of Man doesn't have those aquifers. So it's very sad for me, because I'm also chairman of the Manx Geological Survey, and we've looked for many years for a source of warmth in the subsurface, but it's not there, I'm afraid.
Okay, my final attempt to derail your renewable project. This is a petition to Tynwald from Martin Perkins, former MHK for Garth, that at least Isle of Man government should set up a committee of some sort to consider the prospect of having some form of small nuclear reactor on the island, and this will provide us with all the power we need long into the future without the risk of the wind not blowing and the sun not shining. Surely that has to be a goer.
Well, like biomass, there is a debate whether nuclear is actually renewable. It's not producing carbon emissions. Certainly nuclear isn't. But the problem is, straight off, it's very expensive. And that's most of these small modular nuclear reactors that are being planned. There are a few that are being built, and they're way over budget. I mean, significantly over budget. And when we do the costs based on even the original costs, it would be far more expensive than, say, wind or solar. The advantage with nuclear is you do get a slab of power, but then sometimes you're producing too much. So again, then in that situation you need to store the energy for later use. But the other big problem, of course, is the nuclear waste, and really none of it's been dealt with around the world. So basically it's in temporary storage. And in the long term, you then need to decommission the nuclear power stations. Japan and France have those problems now. What do you do with all the radioactive power plant?
And for many years, of course, the nuclear waste was coming to a location not too far from the Isle of Man at Sellafield Windscale.
Yes. I mean, there are nuclear technologies, thorium in particular, that doesn't produce weapon grade radioactive material. So, which is something perhaps in 30 years would be something we'd look at, but it's not something you can buy now.
Okay.
I think the idea of Martin trying to get a committee to look at this, I think that might be quite good for the public, because there might be an interest then and an education. I'd welcome you've been on a number of committees yourself. You know that it does invite contributions from all different areas, so that might be a good thing for the public to understand. See the risks and pitfalls of nuclear.
Because one thing we've done is we've built an energy system model which takes all the different options into place, even geothermal. We can try all the different options. We update it all the time on prices, and what these models do, they include heating and they include transport as well. It's not just electricity, which is actually, heating is the biggest gap we need to fill if it's going to be renewable in the medium term anyway. What we can say is, by doing this, it will cost a range of this in the future, and also how that will affect the carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. And we can find various ways of plotting a route, and it could involve nuclear, but when you plot that, it's much, much more expensive and takes longer as well. Building a nuclear power plant is a serious undertaking and doesn't play to any of our strengths.
Well, we'll hear a lot more of what it is that you are proposing after the break. You're listening to Perspective with Energy and Sustainability Centre Isle of Man directors Ralph Peake and Dave Quirk. So we heard just before the break there a little bit about the idea of having a committee so that the public could actually get involved and perhaps get excited by various ideas. Tell us a little bit about the consultation, and then we'll maybe get into a bit more detail about what you hope to achieve.
Sure. We really see it very important to have good public engagement, and that's one of the things that Dave and I really set out to do. So we've worked closely with the Chamber of Commerce. I do chair a committee in the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Sustainability Group, and that really has enabled me access to the businesses and try to help them understand what the future could look like for them, reassure them, and then get them on the same page of what they would like the Isle of Man to look like. And so that's helping Chamber form an energy policy of their own, which is good. And we also had a conference last October, which was well attended. We had the Deputy Chief Minister stay for the whole day to listen to the speakers, and we had speakers from the Faroe Islands, from Denmark, and from the UK, and Ireland, and it was really it was well delivered, and people appreciated what was being discussed and shared on the day. So with that, we're going to build on that, and we're going to announce shortly dates of possibly a 2-day, not only a conference, but we now want to expand that into an exhibition. So we really want to try and help people, residents as well as businesses, help them, educate them and understand where they can get the information and help them make their own decisions, because there's various schemes around, but unfortunately with some of the schemes there's not a lot of understanding around some of these schemes, and while they're well-meaning, they can sometimes send you off down the wrong path, we feel. And so helping people gain access to information that they can then educate and make their own decisions, we believe to be really accurate. And I do think that's going to help government as well. Government's got a number of different departments and committees set up to look at this, and we want to try and help the public understand. So public engagement is really going to be, we're going to step that up over this next 12 months.
I don't expect you to give me a straight answer on this one, but has government got too many committees and people working on these sorts of things, and perhaps a little bit less by way of committee and more by way of action might be a positive? Well,
it's not a way I would do it, but as you know, government do have their own way of looking at things, and you know it is a large organisation and a bureaucracy, so it does have to do things in a slightly different way. But there's an awful lot of duplication. I mean, each department is now having its own sustainability policy, which that doesn't strike me as quite sustainable, really. So it'd be much better trying to work together, really. And I think, going back to the James Curran report, it's throughout that report, it's about working together. It's about private sector working with the public sector, and that's really, again, what I urge people to do. That's how the island's going to be in a strong renewable energy position in the near future, rather than kicking it down to the 2050, to actually get on now and start understanding what we should be implementing now, so we can start enjoying prices that are fixed, or certainly reliable prices that we can afford, rather than the volatility that has always been around the fossil fuel industry.
In effect, what your proposal suggests is that the problems that we have currently, as a result, partly at least, of the war that Russia instigated in Ukraine and all the knock-on impacts on gas and oil prices, had we been in the position that you're suggesting, this would have been largely something that we could have, we would barely have noticed any impact from.
Yes, I agree. That we would have been insulated from that, absolutely. If you can imagine, if we could generate all the energy that we need on the Isle of Man, if we could actually generate that here on the Isle of Man, take responsibility for the carbon output that we're producing from the energy that we use, take that responsibility and have that generated here, it would insulate us from many of these issues that we've seen around the world. And it's not just the war. I think one of the biggest fears, and I'm sure Dave will talk about this in more detail, but one of the biggest fears is the security around gas pipelines and interconnectors. You know, we saw that in the Baltic Sea just last year, pipelines blowing up. You know, that's a very real threat to many European countries, and if the Isle of Man does the same with just interconnectors relying on that, then we that's a weakness in our security, energy security.
One of the problems that you face is that there is an awful lot of actually there's a fairly polarised debate, particularly on social media, and of course social media has far less by way of standards in terms of the kind of things that are available for people to look at there. So you get scare stories on the one side from environmentalists saying we really must move and move quickly to the sort of thing that you're suggesting, renewable energy. And then on the other side you have the scare stories of, I've seen pictures of this electric car which blew up, and then we have, even on recognised news channels, electric bike was being charged and it caused a house to burn down because it wasn't being charged properly, and something went wrong. I don't know. So how do you get through? Because somewhere between the two extremes, there is some fairly sound information. How do you get that information over?
Well, we've been looking at the islands where it's working. So there's many islands have got strategies to get to 100% renewable electricity by 2030, and many of them are there already at about 50%, which is pretty impressive compared to our own progress. So, Faroes being one of them, Madeira.
And our own progress, where are we at?
Well, we've got hydro, a very small amount, and we've got the energy from waste, depending how you treat that, as whether that's not entirely renewable, but it is another source other than gas and oil. So really we haven't progressed. But I'll have to say the Isle of Man energy strategy, the document that was produced recently, is really excellent. I mean, it's saying everything that we've been saying, that that's the government's view, and it's really clear that we're going to optimise our own natural resources for energy. It's true, and the first step is being made. The 30 megawatt commitment. What that is something you can get on the grid at present without changing anything on the existing cabling, anything major anyway. Now, the only thing we need to point out is 30 megawatts, say it was solar, would produce on average about 3 megawatts over the year. Of course, when we need it most in the winter, there's not as much sun. I
think it'll not be just me that'll be puzzling that.
Yeah.
How can it be 30 megawatts if it only produces 3?
Yes. So what you have is the capacity of the solar panels, and that would be when it was the sun was shining bright, and you could get 30 megawatts for a short time. But as soon as the clouds come over or it's gone, it's night time, you're producing, well, at night, none. So when you average it out, you probably get 10 to 12% off the maximum over the time. So 30 megawatts on average. When you look at the times when the sun is shining bright and when there isn't any sun, it comes out at about 3 megawatts.
And what is the overall usage? I imagine it goes up in the winter and
yes,
down in the summer.
So it doesn't match our consumption at all, and you're weather dependent.
So where are we in terms of usage for specifically?
So on average, the Isle of Man needs slightly over 40 megawatts for electricity. Now that's only somewhere between 25 and 30% of our energy use. Heating is the big one, which is not covered in that. And of course, then there's transport as well, which again is fossil fuels, and our heating is gas and oil. So if you had a wind farm, say it was 30 megawatt wind farm, it'll probably be a mix between wind and solar, but if 30 megawatt wind, you would, depending on where you site it and the size of the wind turbines, you might get just squeak in there with 10 megawatts. So again, you would be lucky to get 25% of our electricity use from that wind farm. And the other issue then is, of course, the wind's not blowing when we want the energy. So you would need a storage system to make that valuable, at least the Isle of Man, so you can match demand to supply.
And how do you store that sort of energy then?
Well, there's various ways. The ways to do it for a few hours tends to be with batteries. That's how the Faroes does it very effectively. They're running one of their islands almost 100% on renewables. For larger scale, for the scale of the Isle of Man grid, you would probably first turn to hydro. You would use hydro storage, which is essentially pumping water uphill and then allowing that water to flow back through turbines when the demand is higher than, say, a wind farm was producing. But what the situation is at the moment is by 2030 we are committed, the aim is to have 100% renewable electricity on the island. But if it's only 30 megawatts renewable, then 80%, say, will come through the interconnector. And there again, we're then dependent on the UK and maybe the greater Europe, and so we're subject to unpredictable prices again, and we can't predict how much low carbon energy. We are dependent on somebody else, so it's out of our control. And certainly on the energy security side of things, that's something you don't want, because if if a interconnector gets blown up, or a pipeline, which are both likely scenarios, then you're back into even higher prices.
It's fair to say that government has some fairly significant economic issues to deal with. I mean, we've got something like a 10% gap between income and expenditure, and sadly, in the wrong direction, more expenditure than we've got income. How can government justify the sorts of amounts of money that's going to be required to spend on these sorts of projects, Ralph?
Well, this is a long-term project, and what it would deliver would be that security of price and security of energy. So it really wants to be taken as a project, in my view, a partnership with the private sector to enable the private sector to make profits, to enable new careers here on the Isle of Man. We know that the Orkney Islands has created 600 jobs from all the renewable energy they've got on the island.
But they've obviously had a lot of European money that's been invested.
Well, they're not getting that now, and I just may be correct that they can demonstrate 150 jobs, but in their plans again for 100%, actually they're upgrading their renewable system significantly. It will be heading towards 600.
Right.
But for the Isle of Man, we're looking at potentially 1,000 new jobs if we really embraced the green industry as a whole. Not just the energy, but actually bringing new companies over that could see the value of having renewable energy, but predictable prices as well. And that's the thing at the moment. Wind and solar is actually the best value you can get. And what you would do typically, it's not always the case, is you wouldn't get the government to fund all the upfront costs. That is significant. What you do is you negotiate a fixed price contract with an energy developer, and so that extra 80%, we could call that the replacement for Pulrose. Generally, you would put that out to tender, and you would include the transmission. So you need cables, for instance, to bring it to the energy, to the power to Douglas. You would tender that, and therefore you would get a guaranteed price, and you tend to go for the lowest price, and that's the way it works in most countries. It's not entirely true. You can, obviously you can get you can take borrowing, but to fund everything, it could all be done by the Isle of Man itself. But perhaps the Pulrose debt is something we don't want to go through again. And it does mean, if you use the private sector, it does mean there aren't cost overruns, and it tends to be delivered on time, because that's where their profit is.
And when I was in Treasury, we set up that we supported the Treasury Minister at the time, which is our current Chief Minister. We supported the 400 million green bond, and as Dave says, some of that then could be used for government for their share in this partnership, and then the private sector would then come with the rest, and so we then really have that working together option where we could then get this project delivered.
What the money would be used for, I'd say government money is the distribution system, because if we're, depending how you balance it with the heating and the transport, you could be looking at 3 times increase in electricity use on the Isle of Man. It's somewhere between 2 and 4 times. Now that is a significant upgrade. You need with the transmission to bring the electricity to a central location like Douglas. That's what you would expect the private sector to pay some off, but then also the distribution. So we will need a lot more electricity coming into our homes, and that's again a big investment. You could do it with warm water as well, which would lower the electric use, but you could heat your home with warm water. And it might be a combination of that, but whatever, there will be infrastructure investment just to get it to consumers.
And that's quite a sizable amount of money, isn't it? Getting the whole sort of electricity distribution network up to a standard that could allow us to live in this cleaner, greener way that you're suggesting. It's something. I mean, I've seen figures something like that. It's going to cost as much to get the distribution network right as it is to actually produce the energy. Is that about right?
Yes, it could could well be. Yes, and it's really trying to calculate how much electricity you're going to require in the future, and then you know how much to upgrade the network to.
You need a clear plan on that, really. And we call it an energy system, so it's not just electricity by itself and heating by itself and transport by itself. Because, for instance, in Denmark, where I live most of the time, they look at it as heating being the most important thing, and that electricity is almost a byproduct of that. If we could keep ourselves warm and dry in the Isle of Man, our life would be so much better. And if we can find ways that we don't need to worry about the boilers or the heat pumps, that's maybe a better way of doing it as well. So they're focused on the heating, and then the transport is and the electricity is their next focus.
And of course, the other element to this is, instead of heating that largely escapes from the house out through poorly insulated walls, doors, and windows and roofs. Actually, you can significantly reduce your energy requirements just by getting better insulation. That's something presumably that government needs to be more engaged with.
Yes, we at the Energy Sustainability Centre, we've carried out a number of case studies, 5 case studies, which we're just putting the results together now to try again to help people understand what they can do, and it's amazing how little knowledge there really is around this, and unfortunately it does leave gaps in the delivery, as well as gaps in your home to let drafts go through. But really, by focusing on that, by having an airtightness test, by focusing on those gaps and keeping the warm air inside your home rather than actually losing it out through these drafts and gaps, allows you then to run a much lower heating system, or you turn the heating system down and save money. That we found to be quite surprising how poor some of the houses are on the Isle of Man. So we're looking forward to sort of sharing those results shortly with everybody. But it's the understanding you need around delivery of these projects on people's homes. It's putting a scheme together, giving people bags of insulation or giving people a grant. If it's in the wrong direction, you're wasting your time and money and effort. And it's a great shame that this is still continuing. There should be a much more accountable system. I can support a scheme if it's delivered correctly by people who know what they're doing, and that person takes responsibility for delivering the project that actually saves the CO2. And that's not happening at the moment. And that's, when I was in the Climate Change Transformational Board, that there's large discussions around that, but unfortunately there's many people in there who didn't understand practical work and the level of expertise needed to make homes draft-proof and retain their energy.
Because, of course, what we probably need more of is better trained builders, builders who are aware of the newer technologies and the principles, than it is professors and experts from across, so to speak. We need people who have practical and pragmatic ways of sorting these things out.
And those are the new careers for the future. But it's going to need a different mindset. You're going to have to want to really... It's like a car built nowadays is built to really find tolerances. Cars built 40 years ago were built to much wider tolerances, and so it's the same with a home. To actually have the heat being efficient, to be used efficiently, you need to have that home airtight, and then you have to have then a ventilation system to work it. But that really does work then, so you just need very small amounts of heat, or even none, because you can actually use the heat from human beings, from cooking, have that recirculated through a heat exchanger. You have fresh air coming in, which is then pre-warmed by the heat exchanger, and then you can actually live comfortably, warm and dry, with very little heat. That's really the future, and that will determine then how much electricity is then needed on the grid.
Yeah, and we've great tradespeople here, but of course they need to know which direction we're going. There needs to be a plan to know, okay, do I need to be trained in installing heat pumps, or do I need to be looking at, say, even hydrogen boilers? There's a whole set of options out there, mechanical ventilation, heat recovery. There's so many options we have there, but we sort of need a plan to say, well, where are we going to get our main power from? Is it going to be electricity? Is it going to be warm water? Or is there something else coming along? And that's what... The other thing we need to take into account, of course, is retrofitting is expensive on old properties. So there's a balance between producing enough power and energy to keep an existing house warm and dry, because we have the damp problem. You can't just seal everything up here. Is that balance between the network and the individual? And I personally think sometimes it's better to focus on getting the big ticket item. Where is our electricity coming from? Where's our heat coming from? And then you know what to focus on to get let's say the quick wins. Is it sealing up a wind? Having double glazing, or making sure the drafts aren't there.
And part, perhaps, of the problem is with having a target for as far off as 2050. Most homeowners will... the only pressure to actually make any change will be coming from extraordinarily high energy prices, which perhaps is the right sort of driver. It's an economic driver, and that's the reason that they'll be looking to make the changes. But with such a long time, I mean, we're talking 27 years before the island has to be carbon neutral. A number of people, possibly even of my age, I wouldn't say I'm old yet, but I'm advancing in years. But 27 years' time, I'm not going to be too bothered about these things. So is this part of the problem, that maybe we need a more robust timetable, which requires people to be thinking more deeply about these subjects, and more urgently, perhaps?
Yes, I think the overall zero is 2050. But the fossil fuel central heating systems, has got everybody talking, because they won't be allowed in new properties from the end of the year. So that's very current. And I think that's what will help people understand what we need to do to make the changes. There are plenty of options available to have fossil fuel free central heating systems. But my belief is to try and reduce the energy required and then put the right size heating system in. New properties obviously should be designed much, much stricter than they are, and they then shouldn't need a central heating system at all.
I mean, the question, of course, is it's again down to finance. What do you do now if you've got an oil boiler or a gas boiler that's reaching the end of its life? The cheaper option is to put in a new one, an oil or gas boiler. But of course, in the medium term, that might be a poor choice. Much more expensive option is an electric heat pump, but maybe that's the right thing at the moment. But then again, you need a fairly well-insulated house. So there's an awful lot of difficult decisions. But again, I'd say you need a plan, and that's why we're doing the modelling, to say, well, what would work best for the Isle of Man? And then everybody can start to align to that. I say that the Isle of Man government energy strategy is excellent, but it's only a very first step. It's how do you get to the big ticket items? What do you do about gas? It's used in Pulrose. Many people heat their homes with that at the moment, but obviously that's not going to be long term viable. Certainly not if we're going to be net zero.
And effectively what you're saying is the ambition that government has. I mean, government has announced that we're going to have this 30 megawatts of renewable energy by the end of this term, or at least it's going to be started by the end of the term of this government. But in essence, what you're saying is that's likely to provide less than 10% of our energy requirements.
Well, it depends on that balance between solar and wind. If it's all wind, then you might get to 20, maybe even 25%, just the electricity.
Right.
But most of it will be coming through the interconnector. I think that's the way to say it on the current plan. And I think we're saying, well, actually, why would you do that? You might as well. There's obviously also offshore wind as well. There's various ways of powering ourselves here. The one missing element, and again, it's not in the strategy as such, is what to do about energy storage, so that when the wind is blowing, when you've got surplus power, it's not needed. You need to store it, and then for when the wind isn't blowing and there's demand, consumers want their, let's say, electricity, then you need to be able to turn. And that's the part that's also needs to be added, is fairly large-scale energy storage. But that's, standard technology. And again, it can be funded by the private sector, and you make a guaranteed price on that.
Well, what I've seen over the last year when we've started working closely with this is perhaps the difference on the Isle of Man and other islands is people will bring barriers out as to why you can't do this. You can't just put enough renewable on the system because the system will fall over, or you've got to turn pull rows down and then the emissions go up. So there's lots of reasons why you shouldn't do things. What we found when we went to the Faroe Islands was it was a different mindset completely. They were fortunate that the head of their energy generation and network system, SEV, he made a commitment in 2014, and he said that we will be 100% renewable electricity by 2030. And we were fortunate enough to meet him, and he did say that it did take a couple of years for people to sort of let that sink in. But what he found then was the politicians got behind that statement because they believed him. They got behind that vision. They got behind it, and the public got behind it. Now, SEV is slightly different to MUA because it is owned by the people. It is owned by the communities, by the commissioners, if you like, by each parish.
But that's not so dissimilar.
Well, it's
to
not
the
so
MUA,
dissimilar, but they really do feel connected with that organisation, and that I thought was really good. So they had a vision, they got behind it, and they can now share in that going forward. And even though they've got more people living on the island, they've got more demand for electricity, their use of fossil fuels has gone down, and their electricity with renewables is going up. So there's absolutely 100% evidence of this model working.
The nice thing on the Faroes is they fix a price each year. So, for instance, just under 20p a kilowatt hour, and that's what they work towards, and that's with all the investments in wind power, some solar, hydropower, and of course the energy storage side of things. So that it's obviously less than the Isle of Man. So and that's partly because fossil fuel prices have risen. They can drop down again, but that's unpredictability. Faroese citizens and residents know what they'll be paying for the year, and there's no surprises on that.
And it is also fair to say that Faroe Islands are some distance away from large population centres, which means things are likely to be more expensive for them to develop than perhaps they would be if it was the Isle of Man.
It's Danish prices, and I live in Denmark. It's high tax. It's expensive. So yeah. In the Isle of Man has similar wind. It's less. Faroes is very blustery, so they have really severe winds, but then it can drop off very quickly. So the Isle of Man, it would be easier to develop wind. And again, we've got a significant offshore that's shallower water for fixed wind turbines, whereas in the Faroes, it's deep water, so that's why they don't have offshore wind at the moment. You can have floating wind, but it's more expensive.
Well, gentlemen, cheaper, potentially cheaper energy at a more sustainable price and a cleaner environment. Can't see this catching on. Sadly, we have come to the end of the programme. That was Energy and Sustainability Centre Isle of Man directors Ralph Peake and Dave Quirk. Have they convinced you? Is our government's plan to import our energy from the UK through interconnectors a better solution than producing our own sustainable energy with the associated jobs that might create? Does the Crogga gas plant provide better answers, assuming any gas can be extracted? Lots to think about as you digest your Sunday dinner. Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. That's all for this week. I'm Phil Gorn. Got a Myos and Geistach Rum. Thanks for listening.